Good morning, everyone. A few weeks ago, I think a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking with Gary McSweeney, who I know many of you love and adore, and he was sharing with me many years ago. I think it was maybe the first or one of the first times he was giving Sunday service, and he was doing a tandem service with Dambara, who many of you know, who's now in our Ananda Portland community. And he said that for this service, he went first, and he got up and gave a beautiful 7-minute talk. And when he was finished, he said, "That's it," and sat down. And following him was Dambara, who, not to be outdone, bested Gary by 1 minute and gave about an 8-minute talk. And when he was done, just ended by saying, "I'm done," and went and sat down. And then Gary told me they haven't been asked back since, so... which isn't true, but it was a good ending to the story. I don't know if beating that means going under for 6 minutes or over for 9 minutes, but here it goes. Many of you probably have heard or read Swami Kriyananda when he talks about growing up, not looking for God in the way that it was traditionally expressed to him through religion, but still having a very clear sense that he was looking for truth. And he wasn't necessarily sure how he was going to find this truth or where he was going to find this truth, but he was clear in the fact that he knew that a deeper truth existed beyond what was in the material world that he could see. And so he tried to pursue finding this truth in all sorts of ways, in the arts, in writing, philosophy, and ultimately all of these things failed for him until he reached the point where he found his guru, Paramhansa Yogananda, who really showed him what God really is, who God really is, and that launched him in this incarnation, in the full expression of what it was meant to be. And I was thinking growing up in my earlier youth, not having even a clear understanding of what it was to be looking for. I had hardly any interest growing up. I didn't know that there was anything greater beyond what I could see that needed to be discovered. And so I really only had whatever grabbed me was sports and athletics. That was the only thing that I found that grabbed my energy, that allowed me to have some natural enthusiasm towards. And so not really having any other understanding of what else to look for, I naturally, with common sense, just thought, okay, this field brings me a greater sense of happiness than what I'm experiencing normally, so I'll just put my energy there. And so naturally that led me to going to school and college and getting a degree in that field, and eventually a couple of years as a career in that field. But even though I didn't have a clear understanding of anything greater that I was looking for, there was this growing sense, this growing feeling inside, that same feeling that there's something beyond, deeper than what I'm able to see in the material world. Just noticing the routines that people go through of daily life, of school, of career, and yet still having this sense of emptiness. That feeling just grew and grew, and when it grew strong enough, that's when I too was finally able to be introduced to Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, which at that point, the whole world breaks open, your whole reality shifts, and you become aware of something much greater. Listening to that beautiful song this morning, "Dearest, when I think of thee, heavens open, and I see shafts of light." The same can be true when saying, "Dearest, when I speak of thee," speaking about our topic, why tell God anything? Well, when we do, there's this great sense of clarity that comes from, especially Autobiography of a Yogi, those of you who have read, and who also had the same feeling of knowing there was something more, but weren't necessarily able to articulate it at whatever time that you discovered it. But then once you did discover it, just how Yogananda put so clearly, with such clarity, the feelings that we felt in our deepest nature, those feelings that know that there's something greater to experience, that we ourselves are something, a part of something so much greater. And the way Yogananda just put so much clarity behind that was such a heaven-opening experience and a shafts of light experience that there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm that we feel from that clarity and from that feeling that, wow, this person, this great soul understands who we are, gets who we are in our deepest nature, and now I too can feel that with even greater clarity. And it is that clarity, that's a very, very important part of the spiritual path when we discover it, whether it's this path or whatever path we find ourselves on. What draws us is that clear understanding of the divine truths in a way that speaks to our hearts. And it's a launching pad, that clarity, that sets the tone for the rest of this incarnation, because there's such a tremendous enthusiasm and energy force that comes from that clarity. I was listening also a few weeks back of a talk from Swami Kriyananda. It sounded like from his voice, this was from the 2000s, and I got from the talk that the evening before this talk, there was a beautiful choral performance that the choir gave, and Swami Kriyananda was remarking just how beautiful the choir was singing, and how much joy and with what great spirit they sang with. And it just got him thinking about the topic of this music, which you all have probably heard quite often now. You all know that this music that Swami, he was gifted by Divine Mother and by his master Yogananda, that he was able to express, it's in a category all of its own, and yet that category is so hard to define. It really doesn't fit into any existing category that we know of. And Swami was trying to reflect for many years of how to best describe this music, because clearly it was a new expression. And he first remarked that he was a little regretful that the term soul music had been preempted by that time, because it maybe could have fit into that, but then he got to thinking, you can't really fit a song like Come Chill and Wake Up into soul music, or many of the other ones that really aren't soul music. And you have songs that are just for fun, like Cherry Blossoms in Kyoto, and many other things that wouldn't necessarily fit into soul music anyway. So that passed, and then he thought, this isn't classical music, this isn't pop music, this isn't easy listening music, as he said. Well, what is it? And he finally came to the conclusion that the best way to describe this music was clarity music, because each note, each lyric, any part of that song has so clearly expresses the consciousness that he wants or he felt needed to be expressed. And there's no wasted notes, there's no wasted line, there's no wasted melody. In any of the music, everything so clearly expresses exactly what it wants to. And that's why the music is so powerful, why we feel it, why it just speaks to our hearts. It's because it's that same clarity that just touches us and gets it's able to move through all the fluff. And so when we relate this again to our topic of why tell God anything when he knows everything, it's really for our own benefit, because by speaking with God, with Divine Mother, with our Guru, we ourselves become much more clear in who we are, in our true nature, and what it is we are here and meant to do in this life. And it's with that clarity, again, that every decision we make is based and is an expression of that clarity, which brings so much power and magnetism to everything we do. I was speaking with a friend yesterday, just again, growing up in the different areas that we grew up, and just experiencing different cultures and different groups in different states, and just the way people act in some ways, just because there is no clear focus of their lives. They have no clear direction. And what more powerful direction is there than to know that we are all children of Divine Mother, and that we are all disciples of a great master, if you do have the fortune of finding a true guru, or if you're on your way towards that, to know with such depth and with clear feeling that you are and come from this great lineage and are able to become a disciple of a great master. It's such a wonderful launching pad into your life. There's another thing that made me think of this clarity when we're growing up in school. Many of you probably have experienced this when we're made to write a report on any particular subject. If it's a subject that we aren't necessarily all that fond of, we may research it a little bit, just enough to get by. And so the first couple of pages of this report probably have a decent amount of substance to it, but then the remaining 80% is just filled with this fluff of vagary and saying the same thing in just an infinite number of ways, just to try and fill the rest of the paper out, just because we think we can get by. We're not interested in the topic, so it's very hard for us to feel engaged in it and to have any clarity on the particular topic if it's something that we didn't really feel to be true to us. And so if we had depending on the professor we had, they may get a good chuckle out of reading that nonsense that we wrote, or they may not have had such a good response to that. But that's really what our lives become. It's the two sides. When we're filled with confusion or a lack of focus on what it actually is we're doing and who it actually is we are in our essence, then all our life is filled with just fluff, and we aren't able to really have much substance behind it. But then when we do find our true calling, and we do find and remember where it is we come from, our divine lineage, then our entire life is filled with such great substance and such great magnetism that no matter what we do, whether it's in our careers, in our families, in our friendships, everything comes from that core knowing of the clarity that comes from knowing that we are a part of God. And so all of the expressions that takes then is filled with that knowing. One of the other things that came to mind of why it's so helpful to tell God anything when He knows everything already is because in doing so, we become much more attuned to the superconscious flow of energy. We become much more attuned to Divine Mother, and if we have a guru, we become much more attuned to our guru. Often, I think it is helpful for some people to be able to speak to God, to Divine Mother in the abstract form. For a few people that does work, but I know for many of us, what works even much more than that is to bring that into a personal relationship. And that's why it's so helpful to have a guru or a lineage of gurus like we have here, that we can personalize and build that relationship that allows us to converse with them just as we would with our nearest and dearest friend. Those are our best friendships, when we can just share with an open heart completely in any given situation. And so having a guru, specifically by talking with them constantly, building that habit of just speaking with them about every single thing, we naturally attune our own vibration, our own consciousness to their wisdom-guided consciousness and vibration. And in doing so, eventually, there is this merging where there's a there's a lack of separation, and that lack of separation is final when it's complete immersion in that spirit of speaking with God. And you have these experiences, it's such a great fortune to have this line of self-realized masters, and not just this line, but there are many self-realized masters in modern times, or saints in modern times. Just think, a couple decades ago, Yogananda walked this earth in physical form, and just a few years ago, Swami Kriyananda was here in physical form, and their lives so clearly are almost an exact expression of our own lives. They've walked the same exact footsteps that we've walked. They've gone through the exact situations that we've gone through and felt the same exact feelings that we've all felt. And we have such an abundant, we have the readings, we have their talks, we have letters that they wrote to their disciples and friends of just how they responded to situations that we ourselves find ourselves in. Their lives weren't just this easy flow where they weren't up against any material conflict. Of course, they had such great conflict if you read the life of Yogananda, and of course if you meditate on Swami's life, just filled with interactions with all sorts of different kind of people, both good and bad, and they took the time to talk and share about and write down their responses to those situations. And so to have the opportunity to meditate on what their response was, what their consciousness was when they went through a particular situation that's similar to what we're going through, whatever that situation might be. That's such a great boon that we have that we ought to capitalize on no matter what, because in doing so, by meditating on it and then bringing that into conversation, we, again, gain that clear focus on what is the highest response in this. And then once we get clarity on that and know it from within, we're able to then, depending on the situation, see if we can apply it in our own lives. And what comes to mind is a couple situations that Swami Kriyananda went through or had when speaking with various saints. He, at one point, was visiting the Portiuncula of St. Francis in Assisi, Italy. And he was sitting there in the Portiuncula, meditating and praying, and he just felt such an overwhelming sense of sweetness coming from St. Francis, just a sweetness that was unheard of, that was so grand, and he couldn't help but just pray, how is it that you can be so sweet, that one can be so sweet? And he heard the response that, above all, by never judging anybody. And with that, you can feel such a sweet, great sweetness and become sweet yourself. And so once we hear that divine response, whatever question we bring up to the divine, if we are able to be still enough to know the answer, either with our ears to hear it or to feel it in the heart, then that at least gives us a starting point, and then we can see if we can bring that into action in our life. And the other instance of that same kind of thing came to mind when Swamiji was going through a real hardship having to do with fellow disciples on this path that were not necessarily behaving in the nicest of ways to him. And he couldn't help but to feel so hurt, and he prayed to Babaji, why are you letting this happen? And that same response came to him, I don't know if it was in actual hearing Babaji's voice or if it was a feeling, but he could hear Babaji say, these are all my children. And with that, you could imagine Swamiji being able to feel that you can separate the soul from the action that soul is doing. Can we ourselves, recognizing that we are all Babaji's children, Divine Mother's children, can we separate when we find ourselves in a difficult situation with somebody? Can we separate their soul nature from whatever particular action that they're committing that may be disharmonious? And it's in this way that we attune our consciousness to the consciousness of the masters, the way that they perceive the world, the way that they respond to their lives, the way that they think about whatever it is that they're going through. We too can begin to adjust our perceptions, our ability to think about, our ability to feel in a much more refined way by attuning to your particular guru. And eventually, as Swami Kriyananda said towards the end of his life, he said he couldn't tell where Swami Kriyananda ended and Paramhansa Yogananda began. And that merging of our individual, unique expression of the divine with Divine Mother herself, that's for all of us. That's where each one of us is going. And we get there by having this constant communion with Divine Mother, this constant conversation with our Guru. And in doing so, we ourselves will forget, or it'll dissolve where we end and our Guru, Divine Mother, begins. And when we do this, why tell God anything when He knows everything? Why offer God anything when He has everything? That's because we have nothing to lose and everything to gain.